Live. All right. Not bad. 4 minutes beyond the 1 hour late.
Hi, everybody.
We're only 4 minutes later than 1 hour late.
So, hello, YouTube. Thank you for coming along with us on this roller coaster of a scheduling ride.
It was Earl's fault.
Yep.
I agree.
I thought I'd jump in there before anybody tells the truth that it's my fault. It's easier to just point the blame. Turn on my blame thrower.
Oh, that's nice. I like that.
Yeah, I'm going to use that.
Flamethrower, yeah. All right. Though I think because we're starting a little late,
We'll just skip all the stuff and go right to eBay.
Impressed. Yeah. Right.
Until next time.
Yeah.
Retrocompute.
There we go. Okay.
You can fix that in post, right, Paul? We're good?
I think so.
We're done?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Well, yeah. I think if everybody just says something that contains all of the consonants and vowels, that should be good enough for me to assemble an episode.
Ah, there you go.
There was, I think we
Deep fake.
probably
RCR deep fake.
Exactly. Yes. I think this came up at some point in the past, but like when celebrities are recording for the like the driving GPS things, there is some sort of set text that they can read that the computer can then deconstruct and use to sort of build all the place names.
My name is my passport. Verify
Got all
me.
the phonemes.
Yeah.
Happy phonemes.
It says my audio. Some people are saying my audio is low. I wonder
Don't be
why.
fooled by them.
Yeah.
Maybe you're just farther away.
It's possible. Let me just
I hear
Put
mic
this a
noise
little
from
bit more
that,
in
so
my
that's your
face.
live mic.
yeah. I do have it sort of cranked all the way up, not automatically adjusting. So, and I see level. So, sorry if it's low. Okay.
You just have to deal.
Well, I think I
You have a
have
volume
no
knob.
control.
Fix it in post. That's our motto.
Yeah.
Of course, yeah. We're there's still one episode sitting on my hard drive,
He said
unreleased,
threateningly.
but soon. Yeah. I hate that. I don't like to record the next one when there are still ones pending, but at least there's only one pending now. So, all right. Are we ready? Maybe we were ready.
I think so.
Recording's going. It's October 24th, 2021, and welcome to episode 244 of the Retrocomputing Roundtable. The RCR is a podcast about retrocomputer news, nostalgia, collecting, and many things that contain. Why did I think that? For some reason, I thought there were a lot of 24s. Oh, it's 24. That's where it's October 24th, and it's episode 244. That's where all the 24s.
Oh, look
came
at
from.
that.
Yeah,
Look at those twos and those fours.
that's right. That's great. I have a.
That was seamless, Paul. Seamless.
Thanks. Yeah, my phone for years now has had the like when it rings, it makes the sort of canonical office ringtone from the show 24.
Oh,
Really?
Yeah, so
That's
it
an
goes-
odd choice.
Yeah, because I mean,
I
like,
can hear it.
yeah, if you watch the show, it's sort of like it's ever present. It's an interesting.
Yeah,
sound.
when they're in CTU, the phones are always ringing.
Yeah, and it's just a standard office sound, but it's still anyway.
I've made the mistake on occasion of changing my ringtone to a bit of a song that I like. But then if that song ever plays, it triggers me like I should be answering the phone. So that's not a thing I do anymore.
Yeah, though it is actually kind of nice to have something that's not default, because otherwise on television programs and everything, you're thinking, oh, I have a message, oh my phone's ringing, because they do that. So
Or it's an excuse to not have to pick up your phone. Oh, I thought it was somebody else.
yeah, I thought it was on TV.
My phone sounds like everybody's. So that's why I never answer when you call. It's not because I got call display.
Right. Yeah, I was wondering, actually, this came up when I was in some other conversation somewhere else, but is it possible to get a busy signal anymore? Do people know, do the kids of today know what a busy signal is?
Or what it means to be lost.
I called a business the other day, and I got a busy
What'd you call
signal. I was like, what? What is that, and how dare you?
Yeah, normally it's just voicemail. If the lines are,
Right.
what bugs me, I cannot believe we went from you get a message and you get a beep. nice and simple 30 years ago to now you get a message, then you get a long recorded spiel from the telephone company saying, at the sound of the tone, you could do this or press. I'm like, is it that young people don't know what to do if they hear a beep? Like, did we lose the training on that? Crazy that that's not an option anymore.
Yeah. All right. And with that,
Old man shakes fist at phone.
Well, I remember the show Miami Vice. Crockett had a great outgoing message. He was like, "It's the '80s. You know what to do."
And then there would be nowadays a long explanation of what to do.
right.
And
All right,
Thomas keeps leaving messages like, no, it doesn't work anymore. Crockett's like, I'm too cool to roll down my sleeves to change my message.
I think this came up in the context of I was explaining I think what a black box was, so that's which would the way that's supposed to work is essentially it holds the voltage of the phone at such a point where you actually answer it and it does make the audio connection, but the phone company doesn't think you've answered it yet, so they don't start billing.
Sneaky.
Yeah, all these things that are hopelessly obsolete now.
Yep.
All right, so the topic today.
Speaking of hopelessly obsolete,
That's right. Yeah.
welcome to the show.
We talked, I guess it was a couple times ago. I don't know, 2 times ago, one time ago, I think, about this cart, this board basically made for the TI 994A called the Strange Cart that is something that Eric Peel put together. And I think we expressed a little bit of confusion about exactly, or like, there's questions about sort of like, to what extent is this sort of cheating? When you've got you're sort of attaching like a much powerful computer to the computer to do all the work. What specifically this was for people who don't remember from the last episode is it was basically a reimplementation of BASIC with a TI BASIC in a FPGA that ran much faster. And essentially the you put in the cart and you do some sort of things with saving and loading the program to sort of get it to have the program in the cart, and then it runs. And it's whatever, it's running much faster, but at the same time it isn't actually running TI BASIC, it's running something that's binary compatible. And so Eric wrote on our Facebook page about this a little bit, and was sort of clarifying a little bit what the goals were. So let's see, what did he say? Let me see if I can actually read some of what he wrote. So the question he asked, and the question that I think is at least in the area of what we wanted to address, is kind of like what is the motivation to create these modern contraptions for retro computers? Like, why do people do this? And so what Eric said is that I'm driven by curiosity and the desire to learn new skills. Building something like the Strange Cart requires decent skills in computer architecture, electronics design, PCB design, surface mount component assembly, which I do by hand, TMS 9900 assembly programming, TI GPL programming to know how in order to re-implement TI BASIC, and all these things. Many of these skills are non-trivial. Some are professions in their own right, and all have created those enjoyable moments, having a sense of accomplishment, such as getting the LED to flash the right way the first time, and so forth. So I think that is also an interesting kind of attack on this. That it's kind of what you're doing is you're learning how to make PCBs. You're learning how to do electronic engineering, but in the context of an old computer project that you want to try to do. So it is, it's not necessarily that the motivation is I want my TI to do something faster. It's I want to learn how to do this. I want to be enough of a Renaissance person to do this. So I thought that was interesting, and I thought it sort of made for a possibly interesting topic to talk about. And it may not be exactly what we all thought the topic was going to be, but the way I had written it down in the show notes was sort of like talking about times you've spent learning how to do something that has sort of no future relevance, and that may not exactly describe what I just read, but in that neighborhood, what are our motivations for doing things like this, particularly with maybe like newer tech applied to older tech. So anyone have a thing they wanted to go with? Earl, I think you said you had a response to something more like what I just read from the show notes.
I was thinking about it. There are 3 things that came to the top of my mind Two are in the past and one's in the future. So,
Nothing right
F-
now.
yeah, nothing right now. Well, one of them is kind of right now, but so for our Next Without Four podcast, and I'll talk a little bit more about this maybe when we get to the closing section. But Randy Kindig and I relearned the language Snowball from the 60s. That has no future relevance for me whatsoever. Why did I do it? Well, that's explained in the episode, and I won't do a spoiler. Yeah, exactly. It's a shameless plug. But I think probably the main motivation was I remembered it from university, and it was like just a tickle in my brain. Like, I remember that kind of, and I remember it was really fun, but I don't remember that much about it. So let me do a super deep dive and see what it was all about. And again, I don't think that will ever help me in the future unless I go to a party and somebody just happens to bring up, hey, did you ever program in Snowball? So, I mean, that could happen. But it was a very interesting thing to learn about. And I don't regret that at all. But now there is one that I kind of do regret a little bit. I try not to regret the time that I spend with retro because it's always fun learning things, just even if you're not going to leverage them in the future. It's just kind of learning for learning's sake, right? But I tried to also do a deep dive into FPGAs, and I got a mid-range, I think a mid-range in the $200-ish realm FPGA board, and tried to learn how they work. And I found out that even though there are a few people who are trying to make this approachable for hobbyists, it's still really not that easy to learn about. I mean, it's easy to learn trivial skills like blinking an LED, but if you want to do something complicated, like a project that involves a virtual CPU and some virtual RAM and input and output, you get into digital design challenges that you almost have to be a double E to understand. Timing constraints and how the FPGA tools translate what you're trying to tell it to do into the actual placement that it puts into the fabric of the FPGA is just, it was mind-blowing. And I was thinking there's got to be courses or books or something that I could read on this outside of going back to school and getting an electrical engineering degree, which I didn't want to do and didn't have time to do. And it was just hard. And it was hard enough, actually, that I put it aside and I haven't really revisited it. And my motivation was I saw that a lot of people were using FPGAs to build projects for retro computers, to either simulate things that the retro computers did, like the Mister, or to handle things that required such complex timing that it was difficult to do with something like an Arduino or another maker-friendly thing. I wanted to learn about that stuff, but it was just too hard. I may come back to it, but for now, it's just some things that I learned that are stuck in the back of my brain and aren't really getting any traction. The thing that's the now or future thing is hooking up an Altair to a modern RGB LED matrix and having
goodness.
the Altair control it so it could do patterns or do little scrolls of words, things like that. Fun? Useful? I don't know. The particular interface board that I'm using, I don't know how many people have this particular interface board. It seems like maybe it's kind of rare. Back in the day, people used this parallel interface board to hook their Altair to things like a hard drive. But will anybody look at this and go, oh, yeah, that looks fun. I'll drag out my 88.4 PIO board and do that. I don't know. And, how much will I play with it after I actually make it work? It's kind of one of those like climbing the mountain because it's there sort of things. Just I feel like I'm going to learn some things, and I already have in the process. And then it'll be like, ooh, look at that. And then on to the next thing. In terms of the motivation for why to do this stuff, gosh, we could have a whole episode. We could talk for hours on the motivation of doing retro things. Why do we play with these old computers at all? I don't know. I think they're really cool and they're really fun, but it's hard to articulate why that is.
Yeah, I guess that's true that, when we're talking about sort of future usefulness, I'd been thinking about stuff like, learning languages like as you were saying, like Snowball or doing something like that, where it's not going to be sort of modern relevance, but it could be something that you would use in the retro computers. But I guess it's the same question of like, well, why is it actually relevant to make TI Basic go fast? you know, um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I certainly I've thought a little bit about going into learning how to do that same kind of like learn how to design 3D printed objects and learn how to design PCB layouts to make little like simple cards. And I think the idea, at least my thinking, was that this is basically like this is a platform that I could sort of do something useful with with a low level of knowledge. Because I understand that there are that this actually it's not just easy, and it never was. So, but it's still kind of fun to be able to do like at least low level projects of this
I
sort.
wonder if you hit on something there when you said the TI Basic thing, because for TI 99.4 fans, it probably was a long-standing frustration for them that the Basic was so incredibly slow. And so even if it takes a modern take on it, going back and speeding that up might scratch an itch that somebody's had since back in the day. Another thing, a little later in the news, we'll talk about talk on the 1541 drive. But apparently in 2013, if I'm remembering right, there was finally somebody discovered an algorithm that permitted them to really stream the bits fast between the drive and the Commodore 64. And that's cool because if you were a Commodore 64 user back in the day, you're probably still waiting for your program to load. So being able to speed this up and make it like super fast, that probably, again, scratches an itch that's like, wow, this thing was so slow. And oh, by the way, this algorithm that I'm talking about is without modified hardware. So it just took them 30 some years to figure this out, but they finally figured it out. And that would actually be kind of cool because you would think, hey, I could have done this back in the day if we figured out how to do it. But now that we've got so much information and all these internets.
Yeah. And I guess it does sort of breathe a bit of new life into the machine. Like there's now new stuff you could do that you couldn't do before because this thing hadn't been written, not because the machine was not available, but because it hadn't been figured out. That's a lot of what I often think about with the Apple III too. Like it's just everybody sort of moved on from it before they'd actually explored all the stuff it could do. So there's still new stuff to discover. Yeah, this also sort of reminded me of someone making a comment about how pretty much every programmer has written a text editor. And it might actually be sort of something like that. Like, we didn't need another text editor, but it's the kind of thing that you can write. And it's kind of, there's some pride in being able to make the thing work. And so, I of course have several text. I have a nice 6502, machine language text editor that ran quickly on the Apple II, had a way to handle upper and lowercase. And, I didn't need to write that, but I could, and it worked, and I used it.
Cool.
But it might be like, that's why there are many different video output devices for these computers and why there are many different flash drive, devices, because there are some that exist, but, it's kind of fun to make them. I don't know. What do you think, Carrington? Do you have you any sunk time into obsolete pursuits?
I have. When I thought about the topic, I was thinking about like, what have I sunk time into that's obsolete in the sense that it is not productive. It's going to go nowhere. Like the world isn't affected by the fact that I know this. Probably I'm not affected by the fact that I know this. So I thought of most of my hobbies are that. Like I like dancing. So I've taken and taught ballroom dance lessons. Like it just, how does that happen? Like weirdest thing. When it comes to retro computing stuff, I'm kind of my thinking went along the same line as Earl's in that I thought of languages. Most recently, it's been a deep dive into ZIL, or ZIL, the language that Infocom used to create their text adventures. And it's not a language, though, I intend to use for anything. I'm really enjoying making a text adventure now, which I'm doing in Punian form, which is a completely different language. Nothing to do with Zill. The Zill thing came from when there was a bunch of the source code for Infocom's programs, right, their games got released. I think back in like 2019, something like that. I'm sure we talked about it. And so I got to see for the very first time some source code dumps from, say, Zork 1, something like that. And I remember just looking at it and how strange it looked. I don't know MDL, which was kind of based on, like I didn't know any language that looked like that at all. And mostly I was struck by, like, when I would first looked at the code, I remember thinking, the parentheses aren't closed. There's more open parentheses than closed parentheses. Is this a mistake? Like, did I immediately spot an error and I'm that good? Or is it like I don't understand it? Like, how is a language done that? No, it turns out I must have just misread it, because that's not a feature of the language. But I remember distinctly looking at the code going, there are 5 open and 3 closes, and what's going on? And it struck me as so weird. I had to go learn the language. So I've spent a ton of time reading that Steve Moretsky manual. What was it? Everything you always want to know about writing interactive fiction, but couldn't find anyone still working here to ask, that he wrote back in 1989 about how to use this language. And then that got like dumped later. Like, I'm reading it from a PDF that got put out in the early 2000s or something. So I went through that a few times. There's a bunch of sources online now, and some discussion areas. There's a thing on Facebook where people discuss the language and writing code in that language and what they're doing with it. But I don't like Facebook, so I'm left out of that completely. So it's just me and a couple of PDFs learning a language that I don't intend to write anything in, which has been a very unusual experience, because typically the way I've always taught myself a language is I give myself a project, and it'll end up terrible because I don't know the language, but I will just like dive through and say, okay, why don't I make this out of it? And I just figure out the language as I go, and by just cobbling it together, when I get to the end of that thing, and I have technically a working, if very inefficient program, I now go, okay, I know the basics of the language, and then I'll go back and get better at it and reiterate. Whereas I've learned this by just reading about it and then writing some stuff to make sure that I understand it, with no intention of ever writing a program in it. So it's the weirdest, most useless pursuit. But I like the game so much, it's kind of fun to read the language that they were made in. And I don't think I would do it if it wasn't for that. So it's the fact that it's another way to connect with these games that I love and have loved for decades. I think that's why I'm reading about this language. But it is the most useless of sunk time in my retrocomputing life, like by far, because I have zero intention of ever doing anything with it. And yet I keep trying it.
Yeah. But you do enjoy it. So, I mean, like,
I do. Otherwise, I wouldn't do it. Everything with retrocomputing is a hobby for me. And like most things in my life, I'm either loving it or it's gone. So I have this rule that I'll stop saying I'm doing something when I spend more than X amount of time not doing it, depending on what it is. So I can't, for instance, say I'm writing a novel if it's been more than 90 days that I've worked on the novel. Then I'm no longer writing. And I used to have a ton of things that I was quote unquote working on, but that I would take massive pauses from and never get back to. And it became almost overwhelming. Like, I had so many things I was supposedly doing, and yet I would sit around doing none of them because I was so overwhelmed by how many things I was working on. So it kind of gives myself permission to say, I'm no longer doing that. And that's fine. Maybe I will start doing that again. But when I consider things that I'm currently doing, it's only stuff I have touched in the last 30 days or so. And otherwise, it's no longer a thing I say that I'm doing. And that's helped. This is a language I'm still working on because it seems every month I read about it for no reason whatsoever. And it's really, I only have one book about it. So it's more that I keep going back and reading the same PDF printout over and over and then testing myself on it. That's how I spend my time.
I wonder if it's turned into a religion.
It may eventually. When you worship me, you will worship me in either MDL or Zill.
Yeah.
I accept no other prayers.
Yeah, actually, one thing that I came across, let's see, I think I'm already sort of sharing my screen. Yeah. That reminded me of this in a sense, this is kind of, it's sunk time in a sort of like a normal nerd way in a way. But Foon Turing just posted a thread of things that was sort of interesting. It was basically going over, Twitter's changed something about how they handle, or at least they say they have changed something about how they handle images, and basically under what conditions things will get converted into a JPEG based on the original image. So he did a bunch of tests, like he posted things of various resolutions and colors and sizes, trying to figure out, oh, well, so PNG images that are under a certain size will stay PNG and others will be converted to JPEG depending on various things. And he goes through just a big long list of tests, like trying to figure out exactly what the limits are. What it'll take to post something that will not get converted to JPEG. And eventually we get to the end of the thread.
Very long thread.
Yeah. Where does this thread end? I don't know. The thread ends.
This is the thread that never ends.
Anyway, the good news is that these changes will not stop me from posting the entirety of Doom 1 shareware. And then he posts like a 3 ping image that has all the data from Doom 1 shareware uncorrupted, not changed into a JPEG. So I thought that was a very good sort of example of.
I relate to that though. I mean, like a lot of people who self-identify as nerds or geeks or whatever, I will get obsessed about a small thing and just like deep dive into it and then come up 18 hours later and go like, oh, well, that was an interesting way to spend a weekend. I do that all the time, where I will just get obsessed with some small thing and just iterate on it like crazy for no reason.
Yeah. It's funny to see those projects though. The only reason that we care about this is the ability to post the data, properly on Twitter for something that you can't run on Twitter. But all right, yeah, I don't think I had anything.
You've never wasted any
add.
of your time ever. All you do is efficient and useful. You robot.
Oh yeah, no, have I not answered the question? Maybe I haven't.
Yeah, like what do you do? What have you sunk your
Yeah.
time into that was useless?
Yeah,
It's the
I mean,
same Spaceball. Share.
I certainly have plans for such things, but I mean, like the kinds of things I've been doing is largely like trying to get Apple Talk networks to run, and that kind of thing, where it's sort of like it's more or less useless. I'm just allowing transmission of data from one machine over here to another machine over here. They will never.
And you
see
also
the
recently
outside
put
world.
an obscene amount of RAM into an SE30.
That's true. Yeah, yeah. I guess that is sort of pointless.
It's absolutely pointless.
Yeah, that was an interesting exercise. I had it had 5 megabytes of RAM in it, and the way this SE30 is organized, it has 8 slots for RAM things, and so and they have to be put in groups of 4 that match. So what that meant is there were like 4 of them were 1 megabyte sims, and then the other 4 were whatever a quarter of a megabyte is, 256, right? So it had 5, and I got sims that 8 megabyte sims so that the whole thing could go up to 120 megabytes. I don't think there's anything that an SE30 can do with 128 megabytes. I mean, like it was operating fine with 5. But I put them all in. Turns out and all the 8 megabyte sims are actually sort of tall, taller physically than I was anticipating. So when I put the thing back together, it wound up breaking the sort of supports for the last sim, which means that I had to lose the whole end of the like that whole 4 bank, and then I couldn't.
Did you have to, or did you solve it creatively?
Well, eventually I did.
I saw the photo.
Yeah, but so the first attempt at this was a memory upgrade from my 5 megabyte SE30 to 4 megabytes. Because I had ruined one of the banks, but then I did manage to get it to work by using a bunch of rubber bands to hold the thing into place. So inside my SE30, there's three rubber bands holding it, so one can fail without it being catastrophic.
But it looks like police caution tape around your Sims. It's this
Yeah.
hilarious thing with the one on the end leaning forward. It's great. Yeah.
But anyway, yeah. So now I do now have a 128 megabyte SE30 with a like several gigabyte hard drive,
Very
on
useful.
flash memory, and it's for Shufflepuck, right? Basically.
Man, I wish I had that back in the day. If nothing else, just for bragging rights.
Yeah,
To brag that you spent $5 million in RAM.
Yeah, exactly.
that's right.
Tell my friend, hey, how much memory does your SE30 have?
All of it.
8
My
megabytes.
spreadsheets go
huh?
on for miles.
When I
Isn't
crash,
there
I
something
crash
about
forever.
The SE30 would, they have 32-bit dirty ROMs, or what am I remembering? That
Yeah,
you have to do something to get more than that amount of RAM in it?
yeah. There's the ROMs only. I think they only had normally 24-bit addressing. So I've also replaced the ROM.
Ah,
So it has a ROM disk in it. This is from Big Mess of Wires. They have something called the Rominator 2, and so it's got a ROM disk built in, and it's fixed the 32-bit addressing, so it can actually access all that memory. And
excellent.
yeah, it's
I don't think it was a
an
waste.
SE30 in name only. But so I guess there's a pointlessness to that, I suppose.
Well, it is fun because it's like most people will agree it's one of the great Macs, a vintage Macs. Whenever you have a list of the 10 greatest Macs, it's always on there. People either have it or covet it. It's one of the most desirable things. It's the perfect Mac. And you looked at it and said, that's not good enough. That's not good enough for me. What everybody else loves is not good enough for Paul. Paul will make it better.
Yeah, in a
I
way
like
that
that.
is
I applaud that.
not detectable really, except by looking at the about box. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. I mean, the numbers barely fit on in the window of how many megabytes are left, or how many K actually, I guess it's measured in. But okay. Anyway, perhaps we can move on from that.
It'd be interesting to hear what Blake says about this, because I suspect he's got some very interesting things, because he's done a lot
He looks
with
like the kind of
networking
person
and
who
getting
has
old
sunk a
systems
lot of
to
time.
use in certain ways. So yeah, so it'll be interesting if he's on next time. I'm very interested to hear his response to this question.
Yeah.
You'll have to tune in next time for that.
Okay, so and actually, I think we've mined all of the listener feedback for for news items. So,
Well,
so thank
listeners
you,
can
everybody.
write us in to tell us what they have done that is useless. Share,
Yeah, true.
share
That
in
would
our
be interesting.
space.
No, I think that would be interesting. Yeah, so Jeremy in the chat says, I have a 2 gigabyte compact flash card in my Apple One replica.
Of course you do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the sum,
mine has
it says the
64
sum total of
megabytes.
all Apple software is probably less than a megabyte.
Yeah.
It's got Apple One. Yeah. You can have 2 of everything, which we call a Paul.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I set up my I built a replica one, which is the Vince Briel Apple One alike. That's basically, it's got a real 6502 on it, but then a lot of the video and keyboard stuff is handled by some kind of I think Atmel chip. But anyway, I've got that set up, and it has the flash card CFFA 1 in it as well, too. It's pretty nice. But I mean, seriously, I turned it on. I played Lunar Lander. I crashed, and that's probably it for this year of usage of that. But it still looks nice, and I built it, and it still works. So that's also good.
Exactly.
Okay, but we can maybe move on to items of interest and news. And Carrington, you have the first of these. Oh yeah.
I do. Oh, yes, I'm sharing a
Remote
window. So, really, so this is an article about a remote developer. One of perhaps the first remote developers, a fellow named Paul Lutis. This is a competing podcast, so you have my permission to go listen to that, then erase all record of it and come back to the RCR and listen to nothing else other
Do it
than
in a
that.
private
So it's
window.
Exactly. Exactly. It's from Co-Recursive, which is actually a really good thing. So this is episode 69, and it caught my ear because Paul Lutis is the fellow who wrote Apple Writer. And he wrote it living in a cabin on $40 a month. He worked at NASA. And the nice thing about Co-Recursive is they give you an entire transcript of the entire show. It is so professional. It's like, when you go listen to that, please do come back to our episodes. Even when you hear what other people do that is so much better than we do. But he worked at NASA. In fact, there's a write-up in the Wall Street Journal. Switch over to that. Mountain Hermit makes Apple sing in simple English. So he worked at NASA and got sick of the rat race, got sick of the NASA pressure, dropped everything, got rid of it all, and went to move into the mountains in a tiny cabin. And while there, wrote software for Apple, wrote Apple Writer and some other things, and then started making $3 million a year in Apple Writer revenue, like the royalties, and just was like, oh, that changes everything, and had a better mountain cabin. But it's a really interesting story about, well, one, remote development and remote work, which is something that's come up the last couple of years for obvious reasons. And I just think it's delightful that I didn't really know this. I didn't know, here we have Mountain Hermit loves apples and teaches them basics. So in the 80s, he's referred to as a Mountain Hermit, and it was part of the whole spiel. And that is where we got Apple Writer from. This guy living in a cabin and just making it for himself, and then Apple putting it out and him making millions and millions of dollars. And that was $3 million in 1983 dollars. So it's like it's all of the money now. He would have had all of the money. And now he basically sails around the world solo on boats. Like, he's still doing that hermit thing, but no longer for some reason making Apple II software. I don't know what's up with that. Maybe he'll come back to it. So it's really interesting. So we'll have a link to the Wall Street Journal, but I got that in the show notes. But the main thing is a link to the co-recursive podcast episode 69, the original remote developer. Really good deep dive interview, really well produced. And if you like the show, you might find other things in it. Like this podcast is about development, about software development. So if you're interested in programming, it's a good podcast in general. But this was a particularly interesting episode for fans of old Apple II software.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one thing that Paul Ludis did also, this is actually unreadably small here. He also wrote Electric Duet, which was really actually kind of an interesting achievement, because it was allowing for the possibility of playing like two simultaneous notes on an Apple II speaker, which is the way the Apple II speaker works is basically you touch it and it clicks, and that is the entire control. And if you click it fast enough, it will make a single tone.
You Atari people can just put down away your keyboards. We don't want to hear your feedback.
But yeah, so I mean, this was actually really quite an accomplishment, figuring out how to make multiple notes play at the same time. I guess apparently he was also responsible for Music Comp, which was marketed by Apple, and which I think I have a copy of behind me somewhere. But anyway, it was an interesting engineering challenge, essentially, to figure out like how do you click the speaker at the right times in order to get two different sort of notes to come out. So that's the other thing I know of Paul Ludis for.
These are the things you can do when you live in a tiny mountain cabin surrounded by deer.
Right.
Got nothing else to do. Might as well write earth-changing Apple II software.
Yep. Though I suppose it's possible that working on the music software caused the population of deer to reduce.
Maybe.
In the area. It's like, this cabin is not fun to be near. Okay. Excellent. Earl, you have the next thing. You teased it already earlier.
Oh, yes. So Tony wrote in to let us know about that, and a few other folks had tapped me on the shoulder about it too. There was a talk, I think it was at the VCF West, the ultimate Commodore 1541 disk drive talk. I don't remember the exact title, but that kind of sums it up. And it really is. It goes for 51 minutes and 30 seconds, I think. And it is the most information-dense 51 minutes that you'll spend in your life. It starts off talking about the physical nature of the drive, how floppies work, specifically how Commodore floppies work, and then goes from there into a lot more technical detail on specifically how a Commodore floppy is laid out in tracks and sectors, how they have different sector densities per track. It talks about the communication protocols that are used between the computer and the various devices on the serial bus, which includes the disk drives but isn't limited to them. You'd have printers on there too. He talks about copy protection, what types were used, and what types of techniques can be used to recover the information that is on disks that have been thus copy protected. It's a very interesting talk. And if you're interested at all about that topic, either Commodore drives specifically, or just how a drive subsystem might have worked more generally, then I would very much recommend it. I watched the whole thing, and like I say, you got to keep up because there's not a lot of fluff in this talk. But The bits and bytes are definitely there for folks who care. It's really interesting because, like some of the other 8-bit systems, the Commodore disk drives were a computer in their own right. They had a CPU, they had RAM, they had ROM, they had I/O chips, and of course, all of this to interface with the electronics and the physical drive mechanism. It's kind of a complex device, and you can really drill into it, and this talk really does. So I very much liked it. Like I say, we'll have a link both to the Hackaday article and to a direct link to the YouTube for this particular presentation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I haven't watched it all yet, but I have seen enough of it to appreciate the density. It's very well packaged, and in fact, actually, so this is Michael Steele, and this is the person who's behind pagetable.com. So we've talked about pagetable.com before, and so this is as impressive as the written blog, but in talk form.
And it's not just, I agree with everything you just said, and it's not just the material that's presented, it's the graphics and the slides that he used as he goes through it. Really well laid out, and in some cases with animations that drive the point home. I just loved everything about this.
Yeah. It's a very well spent 51 minutes or whatever. Excellent. Okay, I guess I have the next thing. What is the next thing? The next thing is... actually, maybe I'll just... Since the next thing that came up was actually a different talk by Mike Steele on the Apollo guidance computer. So he's done a sort of a similar thing, going deep into that. So if you liked the 1541 talk, you might also like this.
I haven't looked at that. Have you looked at that?
No, only just to find that it exists. So I haven't looked at that.
I'd be very interested to see it. I watched some of the videos where they were restoring one of the Apple guidance computers, a series of videos on that. Mm-hmm. It's a fascinating device. So,
yeah. Okay, let's see. So, my item of interest was sent in by listener Bob, and it is the 100 megahertz. The 100 megahertz 6502, and so what it essentially is we've talked a little bit about doing FPGA projects, and people have put together sort of CPU cores for that would do this 6502 or other things. And so the idea here is essentially using one of those 6502 CPU cores for an FPGA and putting it in place of a 6502. So in fact, rather than just like sort of making a MiSTer or whatever you're doing with it, you instead just like put it back in your Apple II or your Commodore or PET or whatever, except that it can run much faster. So 100 megahertz as opposed to the one that it generally would run at.
That would have messed up your podcast, Carrington.
Yes, yeah. Definitely would have ruined everything.
But yeah, so I mean, the idea is it's sort of the idea is to be a universal accelerator of a kind, and it's been tested out on a number of actual computers. So it works on the Apple II, it works on the Commodore, and I mean, and these are the way it works. I'm not quite exactly sure. How well it works and what it does exactly. But I mean, essentially what it does at the outset is it loads in some kind of memory map so that it knows like where the kind of dangerous areas are. So at least on the Apple II, and I think probably other ones, there are I/O spaces where you can't sort of disturb the stuff that's in them because they're going to change the screen resolution or mode or whatever, make the speaker click, that kind of thing. And so what it does is basically when it starts up, it takes a snapshot of everything except those places that it can't touch, and then basically from then on just operates internally to itself. So it'll touch the soft switches when it needs to do that, but otherwise it sort of uses its own RAM. And I mean, I don't know why, But it's another one of those things where it is certainly an interesting project, an interesting challenge to see if you can do it. And given that we have made these, I say we in the very broad sense, have made these 6502 cores for FPGAs. An obvious thing to try would be to actually put it in place of an actual 6502. So, anyway, it's kind of a neat idea. It's basically just a FPGA on the right form factor chip.
And the core that it uses is called the Arlet core, used in some other projects, and it is the 6502 core that I played around with when I was doing the FPGA stuff that I was talking about earlier. One of the things that I was able to do with that Arlet core was actually get a system on a chip 6502 virtual thing operating and ran some sample code. So that core is pretty well understood, and it's actually fairly simple in design. So this is really interesting.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of a funny idea. Though, I mean, I think the idea of accelerating these computers is that's always on people's minds, because they are really kind of slow. It's at least I know with I'm more familiar with what you have to do in the Apple II, but I mean it's complicated because things like disk access and video access and stuff, you can't speed that up. You certainly can't speed up the disk access because it's expected it's waiting a certain number of cycles for the next thing to come around on the disk, and unless you also speed up the rotation of the disk, then and the sensors and all that stuff, then you need to slow back down to 1 megahertz when you're talking to the disks and talking to video and stuff like that. So so it winds up being actually sort of complicated. You can't just turn the clock up. So, yeah. Anyway, interesting project. Okay, let's see. Carrington, you have the next thing.
I do indeed. So it's not computer related, but it's related to the time in which I loved computers or began to first love them. Now, people, if you think of the 1970s, a lot of people think of like gaudiness in design. You've got like crazy things in disco and everything's gaudy. And one might forget that nobody did gaudy and atrocious like the 1980s, particularly through a design group called Memphis Design. It was actually an Italian thing. And it's one of the iconic looks of the 80s. So Memphis Design is crazy colors. I've got an example up on screen right now. Things that are asymmetrical, things that are bright and shiny, things that are all over the place, stripes and patterns, and just like an explosion. Think Pee-wee's Playhouse. So there are lots of examples of this sort of thing through the 80s. And I have a soft spot for it, but I can't imagine living in a house of it. Could I? Maybe I could, but regardless, it's like so it's bright, it's vibrant, it's exciting. But one of the most iconic things, if people associate Memphis Design with, would be the Swatch watch. We all remember the swatches and those crazy colors and stuff. That's one of the iconic things that came out of this design mentality. And Swatch has now re-released their 1984 most popular items. So if you miss the swatches and you want to program like it's 1984, you want to be in a cabin and make your remote programming, you can once again buy some of the iconic 1984 Swatch designs. There's the gray Memphis, which makes a lot of sense now that we know what the Memphis Design is. There is the black Divers, which is a little staid, I think, if you're going to wear a Swatch. There's the white Memphis, which really starts to embrace the Memphis stuff. Then we get the Chronotech with the red band and multicolor, blue, yellow, and red arms. And then there's the yellow Racer. So these are all now once again available. So if you think of Swatch as just something that you had in the 80s, that is no longer the case. If you feel that you need that extra bit of motivation when you're coding 1980s computers, perhaps when you look down at the keyboard, you non-touch typist and you see your wrist and you see that beautiful swatch on there, you will feel extra motivated to actually get your version of Apple Writer done.
Yep.
I'm excited about these things. If you're not going to wear a calculator watch, then you might as well wear one of these things. I love it. So I love that they're
you
just
have two wrists.
Now
absolutely
this,
could be their slogan.
this, and a
Tourists.
members only jacket.
Right? So for cosplay, maybe. But just like, what the heck, man? If you're not going to wear like an Apple Watch or a fancy watch, you're going to wear just a fun one. Yeah, you could go boring and pretend to be James Bond or whatever and have a super expensive watch on your wrist. Who wants a super expensive watch? Do you never do anything that you bang your... I thump my wrist against stuff all the time. Much rather have cheap watches. I love it. I love that they're bringing back the 1984 designs. It's just delightful. So,
Yeah, that is pretty cool.
yep.
End of the line, Joel in the chat here had mentioned that Casio is also actually re-released to their 1980s calculator watches.
Thing is, I don't think it's re-released. I believe Casio's been making those same watches steadily. We talked about it before. Since that time. The watch that Marty McFly wears in Back to the Future, you can today buy, and I think you've been able to buy it steadily since that time. They just made so many of them. They're all still available, and they're very inexpensive. So yeah, you want a calculator watch, get the original calculator watches from Casio. They have a number of them available, but that one particular model, the Marty McFly model, that's the one I'd want. So hooray for retro watches. This just tickles me. Tickles my retro computer little heart that you can get actual swatches from Swatch, not vintage ones, expensive on eBay, but just new, relatively inexpensive ones. Love it.
Yeah, one difference I think will be that the swatches were worn by high school students and junior high students.
Yes.
back
Hey,
then.
the 80s
and
is
now
back.
it's just going to be
Kids like our style. They wear it, ironically or
Retirees
not.
wearing
It's being worn.
swatches.
Right.
It's true.
I always say, if you're wearing a trucker cap, ironically, whatever, you're still wearing a trucker cap. So you can wear a swatch, ironically, you're still wearing a swatch. Welcome to the club.
Yeah.
And 80s is back. 80s is in
Okay.
right now.
Weirdly, I think of swatches, even though it's the 1984 collection, I personally think of swatches as a late 80s thing going into early 90s. I think of it as a Parker Lewis Can't Lose synchronized swatches kind of thing. I don't think of it as 1984. I think of it as 1989. So, but whatever, that's just me.
Yeah, this that design also reminds me a lot of Memorex. I think had a little line of both VHS and cassette tapes that had this kind of design on it. They were transparent, but they had this kind of like weird, abstract art going by them. I wonder if I can find a picture.
Memphis design, the Memphis Milano, Memphis design stuff was so pervasive. It's easy to forget how much this informed so many things, including industrial design in the 80s. It started in 1980, really was only kind of Memphis group, I think, was only around until late 80s, 87, 88, something like that. But in that 7 to 9 year period, they were incredibly effective in pushing design generally toward a certain thing. And that certain thing was just like, whoa, not subtle.
Yeah.
And then the 90s were like, we're sick of it, we're going grunge. None of us will ever wash again. Hey, look at that. Paul has brought up some tapes.
Do you
Yeah,
not
those are
remember
right
these?
out of the Memphis group. Yeah.
Yeah, and then there were these like pink and yellow and green Memorex tapes. I had a zillion of these. This looks so familiar. I still do. I probably could reach across and pick up a couple of them right now. But yeah, it is all the same sort of aesthetic.
Where you get these like triangles out of nowhere. Everything has to have just triangles on it. Triangles everywhere.
Excellent. Okay,
So
let's
watches.
I had one other thing that I was going to mention. This is Tony sent this as feedback, and it is, where is it? It is here. It is the historical source GitHub repository. It's interesting to sort of look through. It's basically, I think it's just basically a dumping ground for source code of all sorts. So I don't think it's any particular specific platform or language or anything like that. What's the pinned things are all Infocom things, but if you actually look at the almost 300 repositories, they're, Star Wars, a space game, a food fighting game, and a lot of these things are just arcade things. So I just pulled up Pole Position, and it's just a bunch of ROMs. There's a lot of these have a doc file that will sort of tell you like what these files are. These are 2764 ROMs from Namco, November 12th, 1982. So I don't know what the source for all these things are, but I think this is basically just when people find source, they put them here. I think I've seen Jason Scott tweet about a couple of things as they went into here. So if you are looking for source code to explore, there is not a lot of help available here. You know, you have to figure out yourself what it is.
You're on
Crystal
your own.
Castles, a gem hunting game for bears. Anyway, anyway, so check that out if you're bored some lazy summer afternoon. See what's there. I think it's possible that you will find something interesting to read. So, okay, let's see. I think we've hit the end of the items of interest and news, unless I skipped one. Earl, did you have another one?
I did not.
All right. So, I think with that we can move to a word from our sponsor. All right. And we're back. The
That was a great
what do
sponsor.
we call it? Oh yes, it was. Yes, fantastic.
Fantastic.
Actually, I think we know it was IBM. So.
Oh,
go
do we?
on.
Oh, okay. I don't think I know that at this time.
But
It's for the
speaking of-
5100. Get one while you can.
So the host's retrocomputing gift idea this time is on the board game theme. It is a board game called Lovelace and Babbage. Carrington, you were the one who found this. I don't know if you
Did I?
know much about
Well
it.
done,
Yes.
well done, me. I don't know anything about this.
It's $20. What do you have to lose?
Exactly. Well, $20.
Yeah. And there's a YouTube video that explains how to play Lovelace and Babbage. But it's so it says in Lovelace and Babbage, players program the world's first computer, the analytical engine, to help famous patrons solve challenging problems. Compete against your fellow programmers in real time. Develop your subroutines and upgrade the shared computer. Receive influence from patrons in 5 areas of society. Balance speed, care, and clever maneuvers to win.
I love how many games have been made where the goal is to program something as if anybody but us want that game. It is crazy that that's a thing. There's so many of these. Like, this is a game about programming in C. This is a game about programming in Fortran. This is no, how would I ever convince anybody in my life to play these games with me? Even on my birthday, even one time. Not a chance. And who wants to be Babbage when you can be Lovelace? Everyone's going to fight over the one person.
I
It
think my
looks-
family would play this, with me once.
It's pretty looking. Like, it's got a real cyberpunk feel. So maybe you could fool people into thinking it's something different. And then they're trapped. Then they're playing the game, and it's like rude to stop.
Yeah.
And even if the game isn't great, which we don't know, I mean, it may be fantastic.
Oh, we know.
It's a programming game.
But
We know. I'm
it would
obsessed with
still-
these things. I'm
still
obsessed
probably
with
be
picking up a bunch of
educational.
programming games. I want to get a bunch and bring them to Kansas Fest because, like, the only people in my life that I will ever get to play any of these programming games, and I would like to play them all, is people at Kansas Fest. I suspect if I bring these games there, people will play these games with me, and then I will leave these games there because they will have fulfilled their function in my life.
it could be a whole evening session.
Could be. How exciting! How exciting
Yeah.
for me! I'd play all of them.
I think I'm not entirely convinced this isn't fun. This might
See,
actually be.
that's how they get you.
Yeah.
I mean, I love games. I love board games. I love tabletop games. I love gaming of all sort. And so the idea that a game would also relate to other things I love, like computer programming, sounds wonderful to me. But bingo cards ready. My girlfriend lives in Canada. You wouldn't know her. Would never play this thing with me, and I get her to play tons of tabletop games. I think she would find this boring.
Yeah.
I think so.
Well, with that sales pitch,
With that glowing endorsement.
you can get the so we found it at least at Genius Games. I'm not sure if this may be their own thing or this may be just a seller of games, but we found it. Well, it looks like the company's name is Artana, and it is $19.99.
$20 for a
Games.
tabletop game is very reasonable.
Yeah. And it does look nice. So even if you don't play it, it might look nice displayed on a shelf.
Is that one of those sunk cost things? Like, you have a
Yeah.
game that you don't play, just to have it.
Oh, that might come up later in the YouTube as well.
Okay.
And when I say YouTube, I mean eBay. But it's one of those big internet corporations.
They're all the same. Big faceless corporations who hate us.
Yep. But okay, so once you have exhausted all of the people in your life that will play Lovelace and Babbage with you, we can now we can turn to eBay, and Carrington has the first of the things to look at on eBay.
I do indeed. Now, if you're going to sit down for a long time and play a game, I think I'm sharing on the screen here. One thing that you might want to do is save your butt with a stadium seat cushion. And this, especially for the starting bid of $10, if you pick up $10, it's pretty cheap. It's an Apple NFL Super Bowl seat cushion. So it's got the Apple logo on one side and Super Bowl XIX, Super Bowl 19 on the other side. And you won't have to scurry off to Google to figure out, is that the Super Bowl in which Apple played its great, big, famous commercial or not? Because I did that for you. And the answer is no, it is not. It is the next year. It would be so much better if this was Super Bowl XVIII. What is with you people having, like, come on. What, you people, by which I mean Americans, all of you listeners, why is your Super Bowl always in Roman numerals? It makes it so difficult to understand. And why isn't it just the year? Why isn't it just Super Bowl 1985? So this is the Super Bowl from 1985. Disappointingly, not the Super Bowl from 1984. But let's say you went to the 1984 Super Bowl. You were so impressed by the commercial that you just stayed there. Wait, there are different different stadiums every year, aren't they? Don't know football. So then they pick you up and they carry you the next year to the next stadium, and you're waiting and waiting for Apple's big commercial, but there isn't one. But to mop up your salty tears, they give you this. I don't know. It struck me as an interesting thing. So if you're into sports and you're going to watch something, you could sit on an Apple Super Bowl seat cushion, and for $10, I think that's a good deal for an Apple collectible. This, who knows? If there's 6 days left, it might go up to $200, in which case it's not even remotely a good deal. Why are you paying so much money for a seat cushion? But for $10, sure, why not? This is my first choice. Paul, have I convinced you to buy this?
I mean, it's an interesting artifact, and it's sort of known. It's known that they did this, so it is kind of neat to be able to say, like, they had a Super Bowl cushion one year, and this is it.
Wait, did you? This was the thing you knew? You knew they did Super Bowl cushions?
Oh, I think it's one of the sort of known collectibles out there.
I did not know this.
Oh, but
well, and if you're trying to get the complete set, you need to be careful because the eBay title looks like it might be incorrect. It says it's the Super Bowl XX seat cushion, but it isn't.
Maybe that's why it's going to be cheap.
It's the XIX seat cushion. Imagine your disappointment.
When you wanted one from the next year. And also, it'd be hard to get the whole set because there's probably like 30, 40,000 people in the stadium. So to actually collect the entire set of these would be expensive.
Yeah, I think that probably would be.
I'm trying to get all of them, all 30,000 seat cushions.
Some of them may not actually be in a condition that you want as well.
Pre-sat, right, yes. This may not be. Anyway, that's my first choice. My second choice, keeping in with the theme of the last thing I was talking about, synchronized swatches, folks. If you want a bit more Memphis design, it's a computer mouse mat from the UK, £6. It's your lovely Memphis design computer mouse pad. I like this because Memphis design, it's weirdly making a comeback, but it's essentially a dead design language. Mouse pads, yeah, they're useful. So this is like hitting with all cylinders on usefulness, and I love it. I absolutely love it. So it's from the UK, $6. Get yourself a Memphis design mouse pad, and then look down. Have your Memphis design on your mouse on the one hand, your swatch on the other hand, and you're just living the life. You're making all good decisions.
Mm-hmm. Listening to your cassette tape. Yeah. Very nice. End of the line, Joel, in the chat mentioned that I think it's possible I'd heard this before, but the 1984 commercial that Apple made actually did run late at night on some channel somewhere in 1983 in order to qualify for the end of the year awards. So it was sort of previewed in secret somewhere, but it had to air in order to qualify. So.
Sneaky.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. Earl, you have the next thing.
What do you have that can possibly beat a Memphis designed mouse pad?
Oh,
I'm sure you will be convinced that this is in fact that thing.
Okay. It'd be hard to imagine I wouldn't be. What do you got?
Can you display it?
I will. Do that. Yeah.
For our tubers.
We have
Little
potatoes.
taters, we call them.
So Normally, I don't like to see things broken out and sold piecemeal, but this is an exception, and I'll tell you why. What we're looking at is an auction for an Atari 400 keyboard. And you'll recall that the Atari 400 membrane keyboard was famously awful to type on. And what would happen is, back in the day, there were some aftermarket replacements that would give you more of a full touch keyboard. I don't know that this is what's happened here, but I suspect that somebody took this Atari membrane keyboard out and replaced it with one of the upgrades. And now the original keyboard is being sold, which is cool for a couple of reasons. One is I just love the design of this keyboard. I would
I
buy
do
it
too.
just to look at it.
This is an example
you
of
can
one of
put it
those
right
things
next
that
to
is
the-
not useful but beautiful. Like it's just, I love the colors. I love the look. It's horrendous as a typing thing, but it's the reason why I think the Atari 400 looks better than the Atari 800. Although the Atari 800 is better than the Atari 400, definitively is underscore is. But this just looks so futuristic. I just love the colors. I love the browns. I love it. It's one of my favorite looking keyboards, but I never want to touch it.
It actually does look a little bit like the Star Trek, the Star Trek screens. It has that same
Well
kind
spotted.
of that same kind of design.
Well, the other thing is the auction is starting at a bid of $4.99, which I thought was cool. And lastly, with some Atari 400 keyboards, they weren't treated as well as others, either in terms of the environment in which they were stored or the way in which they were used. Some of them started to crack. Some of them were badly faded. This actually looks pretty good. It says lightly used. And when I went through the auction pictures, it looked like it was in pretty good shape. And so if you have an Atari 400 keyboard, now they say they don't know for sure if it works. So that's one thing to be careful of.
That's one thing about this keyboard. It's almost impossible to know if it works.
That's right.
Even if it is working.
If you're
it's
typing,
very
wait,
tough to
is this working? Is this working as expected?
So, but if you have an Atari 400 and the keyboard is battered and bruised, like some of them became over time,
Angrily
this-
beat upon,
exactly, this might be a worthwhile replacement for you.
especially for $5. Like if it stays relatively cheap, who knows? But it's
To
a
me,
couple days left, but-
$5 and $8 shipping, I'm almost tempted to get it myself. I don't think I will, but very reasonable.
Well, no bidders yet, so we'll see.
Yeah, those do look really nice. Okay, let's see. So of course, I have a few, but I'll
Cool.
keep it
What you
a
got?
little- a little low. Let's see. So I kind of went down a weird non-computing rabbit hole when I saw this.
What is this?
And I think it was listed. I don't know why I saw it. I guess maybe it was mislisted in a computing technology category or whatever. But it says vintage Thomas Edison Ediphone voice writer, dictaphone wax cylinder recorder, and that's more or less what it is. It is a wax cylinder dictaphone dictation machine.
All my future podcast episodes will come out on wax cylinders. I love this.
It's
Wow.
And they will be sent to you by pneumatic tube. Thunk, thunk, thunk.
yes, I hope so. But yeah, so basically it's just a little thing. It has a metal spindle that the wax cylinder goes on, and there's a connection. So this is supposed to have a like a speaking tube, which is not included. And actually, no wax cylinders are included with this particular auction, but it's a $40 starting bid, so it's actually not very expensive for this sort of thing. I found you can find some dictaphone wax cylinders separately in a separate auction. So they look like they look kind of like little wax black cylinders. I think if you could kind of zoom in on the photos, you can see that they have a kind of a like record type grooving on them. So you could conceivably play them. And I found a video of, let's see, somebody who found one of these at a thrift store and sort of walked through like how it works, like how you use the thing, and had some sort of solutions for the missing tube. He got some like funnels and stuff from Walmart and connected it to the thing.
Well, you know how like with certain magnetic media, you can microwave it over to erase it. I wonder if with wax cylinders, you just got to heat them up and it just smooths it out, and there you have effectively erased it. Time to start again.
Well, there was some kind of oil that this guy in the video used. The video's by C.J. Holmes, but that sort of like rubbed it down to erase the stuff that was on it before, because it was meeting notes or something that wasn't precious.
My friends and I make puzzles for each other, escape rooms, scavenger hunts. I'm working on a scavenger hunt right now for my girlfriend. You've already checked off that bingo box, so it doesn't count me mentioning her. I love the idea of sending the first clue on a wax cylinder and just like deal with it, figure out how to play it. It's like we're now raised everything to another level. Because if you received just a wax cylinder, how would you go about listening to its contents? Like, could you go to a library? Like, where would I figure out a way to play it? That seems like a fun little extra twist puzzle to throw in. My gal might regret your auction choice.
Yeah, it's actually kind of neat to see. Like they so the guy in the video recorded some stuff and then went to try to play it and had to sort of seek around a little bit manually to try to find it. But when you actually were using this, the wax cylinders came with a little insert that went into a little thing that's it's a little sliding thing below the cylinder itself, and there's a couple little punch buttons that let you punch like here's the beginning and here's the end of the recording, physically linearly on the medium, and there are two punch buttons. One of them is labeled C, I think, which was to indicate a correction. Like, so if there's a correction that you needed to do, then you sort of notated it. It's sort of like edit points in a podcast, right?
That was probably also useful if you only use part of a cylinder, because no doubt you'd want to use the rest. He's got a message here, but it ends at this point. I can safely record past that. Yeah. Love it. Love everything about this. This is truly a lovely item.
Yeah. So it's not, and I mean, the one in the video is lovelier than the one on eBay, but the one on eBay is not bad, and it really doesn't seem to cost very much. So
yeah, what is it, like a $40? Yeah, $40 starting bid. I would take something like this for $40. I think I would easily get $40 worth of fun out of this.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. Anyway, so I thought it was interesting. It's not retrocomputing related, but whatever. Not everything is.
Does it say what year approximately these are from? What time frame?
20s, I think.
But how about what about a retro challenge in November? You get one of these things, record software to it, and see if you can read it back into your computer through the audio jack. So
yeah, I was
distribute software this way.
It would be an interesting thing to see if you could record something like cassette software onto this. The frequency response of these is terrible,
right?
But it's possible you could do it.
But a lot of software on cassette, I was never able to get to load either. So it might be a legitimate recreation of the experience.
Yeah, exactly. It would work equally well.
Yeah,
just like your Atari 400 keyboard. Okay, let's see, what else did I find? I thought this was sort of interesting. This
That's
just
expensive.
as a sort of a note. Yeah, I mean, like I'm not suggesting bidding on this. This is Online Systems, Sierra, is what they became known as. An adventure game for the Apple II called Mystery House, and it still has a fair amount of its plastic wrapper around it. It's been opened, so the contents have been taken out, but it's been carefully opened. It's called High Res Adventure Number 1, Mystery House. It is a notably collectible game. So
I didn't know there was an online version of it. I only know it as the Sierra, the Black Sierra version.
Well, this was it's basically the first. I think it might be the first graphic adventure game, something like that. So it has 7 days, almost 8 days to go. 7 days, 23 hours. It has 22 bids. It is currently at $1,684, which is kind of crazy. Because when you look at it, it is, it's a piece of cardboard. It's a little registration card. It's a disc that may or may not work, and it's a piece of paper.
But again, this is like it's collectible because of its history, because of what it
Exactly.
is,
Yeah.
not so much for the use of it.
Yeah, so I was thinking a little bit about the idea of getting something that you actually aren't going to play. I mean, like the point of having this is not to play it. The point of having this is that this is an artifact. So, but I'm still pretty amazed at how fast that went up so high.
With 7 days left to go too.
Yeah,
So there's going to be some big bidders just holding off till near the end. So this is going to go for a lot.
yeah. Anyway, sort of interesting.
Good luck with your bidding, Paul.
Yeah, I have one,
Do you really?
but seeing this, I do kind of wonder how long I will have one.
Right?
Yeah. Anyway, but yeah, no, it's pretty amazing. It's amazing that that there are people who value the history of this to that extent. I mean, then it's in good shape. I mean, and it has the plastic, and I mean, like that's interesting. But when you really do sort of think about the raw materials when they made the thing, I mean, it was just they got some nice art, they printed it, mass produced it on a on a small scale on a piece of paper, and that's what it is. So, okay, let's see. I think, yeah, maybe I'll talk about both of these. So, I found a auction for something called the Laser 50. I'm not sure if we've ever talked about this before, and I don't know too much about it, but it's basically kind of like a little learning computer.
So it's not laser like the Laser 500? Is it same laser same
I think
company?
it is. I think
Oh.
it is. They made a bunch of stuff. So
Right.
so they did they did make like Apple II compatibles, but I think this is a much more basic in every sense computer. So it's got a single line display. It's got
What more do you need?
right. Actually, one of the so I saw this. I thought it was sort of interesting. One of the things that I thought was interesting was on the back they talk about the expansion options. So you can get a cassette and a printer, a couple different printers actually, and a couple things that I can't even read. But there's a couple more things that you can add to it. Looks like maybe a I don't even know.
The last two are so small, they must be just cartridges or something because they're way smaller than a tape player. So I'm got RAM and ROM packs probably.
Yeah, but it would be So I was thinking these are probably largely thrown away by now. So the fact that there are actually two on eBay is a little bit
Are they
surprising.
really? Oh. I suspect I would like to play with one of these. I don't know
Yeah.
that I actually want to invest and own one, but to sit down and write a little basic program for this would probably be a fun thing.
Yeah, and both of these actually that I found, the one was $75, one was $120. So it's not they're at fairly high asking prices, but they're both pretty complete. So they have the manuals, the box is in nice shape. So you could get that experience, and it's possible that you would get $75 worth of entertainment out of it anyway. But I was also thinking too that just like I wonder if you will ever be able to find those expansion things, and I bet the answer is of course you won't. So
Also, did they even get produced? Just because they're on the box?
that's all. It's always a good question. Yeah.
Right.
Great
A
question.
similar
It was
computer
well phrased.
to this was the, well, this looks like it has a real keyboard, but the TI CC40
Yeah.
was similar, single line display, basic programmable, and some of the options for the CC40 either didn't get produced or in insufficient numbers so as to make them unobtainable at this point. Is this VTech? Is that what it said in
Yeah.
the, okay. So it is the same VTech that made the other laser.
Mhm.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah, the CC40. I'm trying to remember. I think the thing that they never really made for it was the storage device.
Mhm.
So you can't get anything out of it, which is like just kind of insane. I mean, I think there's a like a serial port or something, but there, I don't think there isn't any sort of like either cassette or tape or like disk drive. I don't think for that.
You have pen and paper. Stop being so lazy. Just
Right,
write it all out.
Okay, let's see. And then I guess the last thing. This wasn't super vintage. It was actually 2003, I think. Yeah, it says. But I thought it was kind of interesting. It's the Spaceball. It is a mouse that is in kind of a pleasing configuration. It's just sort of a ball that's kind of floating in space. I mean, it's not
If
quite.
Memphis Design made a mouse,
Yeah.
it's this.
That's also a good name, the Spaceball 2003C.
The sequel to the original movie.
Apparently, it's you can get the drivers for it. That's been tested by the seller to a certain extent.
Okay, so it's like for
So,
CAD stuff for 3D things. Kind of
Yeah.
cool.
anyway, it's sort of a unique thing that I hadn't seen before, and we might have to start accepting the possibility that 2003 counts as retro.
Everything's retro. Wednesday's retro.
That's right.
If your memory's bad enough, everything's retro.
That's right. I called this one Henge, but we don't need to talk about it. Yeah, let's see. And I guess okay. I'll talk about this last one and then I'll quit. But this I thought it was interesting. We've talked a little bit about the Coleco Atom and how the fact is that the power supply was in the printer, and that's kind of annoying because who wants a printer? This is a Coleco Atom power supply that seems to be actually badged as a Coleco Atom. You can't really
I
see
didn't know
it
that was a
very-
thing.
Yeah, I also did not, and I don't know. I still don't know if it's a thing. It is at least made to look like it was badged by Coleco, and I think the seller believes it is old. It's conceivable that it really is old and they sold this thing, but anyway, if they did, this is an instance of it. If they didn't, this is a nice mock-up of what it would have looked like if had they sold it.
Yep.
And regardless, it's useful to the extent that you want to use an Atom and don't want to have a printer.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of caveats there, but
But it's useful to that extent, yes.
right.
So are a lot of things.
All right, excellent. So I think we made it through pretty well.
We did indeed. Well done, us.
Okay, let's see. So I guess we can move on to closing discussions already. Carrington, do you have any closing notes?
In the retro world, I read a book this week that was different than most retro computer books. I read all the retro computer books. I like them. I like reading history of computer stuff and like this person made this language or this programming thing or whatever. Last week I read Soul of a New Machine. Do you guys know that one?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I quite enjoyed it. But it was I think maybe I read it a couple weeks ago. I read it before the last time I was on the podcast. But it didn't even seem worth bringing up. It was good. It was creating a computer thing, and it was fun. About the Data General, I don't know, one of their mini computers, and it was an interesting look at like the creation of a mini computer. But it was kind of the same as all those books. If you like the books, it's as good as any. But this week I read one that was finally different. It was like the first time I've read a computer book that said, all that is myth. Every time you read about this kind of stuff, it's all lies. Here's how computing happened. And it's called A People's History of Computing in the United States. And I was not persuaded by it, but I kind of wanted to be. So it was what a fascinating read. So it's about the invention of the personal computer. And it starts with this idea that we're given this myth that computing was giant monolith mainframes, and then a few white dudes gave us networking and computing and brought computing to the people. And thank goodness for these half a dozen white dudes. Like it's just like you got Gates and Allen and Wozniak and then the modern people, the dude bros who are running everything. It's like and this book says like that's not at all what happened, and starts to talk about the difference between, say, batch processing and timeshare. And those are fundamentally different things and ways to approach computing. And timeshare had fundamentally networking in it. And it was about a ton of people doing stuff together back then, like back before the Apple. You have people like the general public just getting into computers and networking things and having things that were essentially, addressed message passing, which was essentially email and online games and all those things through these other texts that were more generally available. Where it falls down is its example of generally available will be like the time sharing system at Dartmouth and how all these people at Dartmouth used it. And I always step back and go, well, Dartmouth is also not exactly indicative of the general population of the United States, even if it's everybody at Dartmouth, which it wasn't. It was only like math majors at Dartmouth. But it was just fun. It was fun to read a book that was just taking a different stance, a different idea that like there's other things that happened in computing. And it takes a real like adversarial stance. It's like the author was Joy Lisi Rankin. Don't know who this person is. I don't even know why I picked up the book, but it's a real, like power to the people. This is what really happened. That's all a myth. So if you want to read something different, like a different approach to computer history, I'd recommend it. It was a fun, not necessarily persuasive, but interesting book. So happy to have read it. It's the first different thing in computer history I've read in ages. So I did that.
Excellent.
Have either of you guys read it or heard of it? I'd never heard of it
Nope.
before.
No.
Oh.
But yeah, I'm curious now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely worth the read. It's like most of these things, it's a quick book. It's probably 300 pages or something, but you fly through it. It's easy single evening read. I liked it, but it's interesting that it takes this kind of anti-Silicon Valley approach. It says, oh no, there were a lot more people involved. Let me show you an example of other white guys, but it's not quite persuasive, but it's really fascinating. It's very different than any other book I've read on the subject. So definitely worth the read. Yeah, highly recommend it. Let's see if anybody else is more persuaded than I was. But I wanted to be. I'm like, come on, no, give me more. Oh well, nope. But still, I liked it. That was fun. Yeah. I've done that.
Earl, you have further shameless plugs?
Yes. Well, it's an extension of the shameless plug from before that Randy and I kicked out. We kicked out a new episode of Next Without 4, and it's about the language Snowball, all in caps. And you might think, wow, that must be related to COBOL, which is suspiciously also all in caps and has an O-ball
Suspicious.
on the end. But
it does indeed have an O-ball on the end.
But they couldn't be more different languages. And the reason that Snowball had stuck with me from the university class that I took, which was a survey of programming languages. So we spent about 2 weeks on each one and just kind of blazed through a bunch of them just to see how different languages did different things. And the thing that I loved about Snowball was it dealt with character strings really well. It's kind of its whole reason for living. Character string parsing, string manipulation, that kind of thing. Whenever I would look at a new version of BASIC back in the day, one of the things I wanted to know was what string parsing functions does it have built in? Because that's really helpful and really important stuff. So, but taking the deep dive into Snowball was fascinating. And probably the most fascinating part was the regular expression stuff that we know from modern languages. All modern languages have some library or capability to deal with character strings really well. And you had the Unix functions and Perl and stuff like that. But this goes way back. And it was so incredibly functional. There were so many different ways in which you could slice and dice a character string. I was surprised. I was surprised actually to see something in the 60s that had this much of that capability. So anyway, we could have a link over to that episode. Again, shameless plug, but I really enjoyed that. That was so much fun. And it was really fun reliving something from my university days. Now, in those days, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have a lot of resources. I think the only thing I had was just the book for the class that breezed over the basics of Snowball. So you couldn't really do a deep dive. And obviously I didn't have a computer at home to go play with Snowball. It didn't even ever really run on 8-bit computers. So having the internet now and all the PDFs and the capability to run a modern interpreter for it was fun too. I was able to learn more than I ever could have learned back then. So it was
Cool.
fun.
Did we determine last time that the N in Snowball is the N in string?
Oh, see, you have to listen to the podcast
Oh,
for
okay.
that because we actually talk about the naming, and it's a fun story, and I'm not going to give it away.
All right. Okay. Excellent. Yeah. No, I really like the fact that that podcast exists. Actually, it's a really sort of interesting niche.
Yep.
So
It was way
looking
too
forward to
long
listening
between
to it.
episodes. We've got our topic pick for the next one. We've
But it's deep dives into like languages, right? So like I think it's the kind of thing where it's perfectly like I'm a subscriber and I love what you guys are doing. And if it's months between episodes, that's okay. It's not a current events podcast. It comes out when it comes out and it'd be like, here's a fun thing about this language. Like whatever. Take as much time as you want. You're making a record of like just talking about these things. So I think it's totally fine. Some podcasts, yes, I want it to be a regular thing. This one is just one that it's great when an episode comes out and I listen to it. It's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, sort of like a surprise gift too, when you forget that you're on the feed and then suddenly, oh, here's a new one of these. Excellent. Let's see. For me, I don't know. I'm still setting the stuff up. Spent a lot of time sort of scanning things. Getting actually largely kind of like figuring out my scanning pipeline. And I think it's working pretty well.
Wait, are you doing a different scanning pipeline now that you're in a new location?
Yeah, well, right, and it's partly worse in a way because it's I have a flatbed scanner of the home variety rather than a industrial photocopier of the office variety.
Got it.
So it's a much slower process. But Michael had suggested, I think, I don't know when, maybe it wasn't even on our podcast. It might have been on Retro Maccast. I'm not sure, but he suggested using ScanTailor Advanced, which is it's a program that basically sort of lets you sort of adjust like the skew. It does a lot of automatic page separation and stuff like that. And I was sort of skeptical. It seemed like it was kind of slow. Didn't work as well as I wanted it to until I figured out how to use it. And it's still maybe a little bit slow, but I've actually come entirely around. That is great. It is much better than what I was able to do with Acrobat. So yes, I would recommend attempting to use ScanTailor Advanced if you want to try to do this kind of scanning stuff. I think it works pretty well. But so eventually, the next step is going to be upload all the stuff. But
Right.
I'm at least doing some of the scanning. And this is a project it's a long-term project, but I kind of wanted to at least work out the steps that I was going to have to go through. So these are sort of like test projects. One of them was, in fact, the things I've been scanning have been these. See, actually, I think I can find them. They're these special delivery software, Apple things. So Apple had distributed a bunch of software early on. Basically, they just served as distributors for other people. Oh, Carrington disappeared.
Where'd you go, Carrington? Come back.
But so anyway, so they didn't do this for very long, but they sort of, in order to sort of increase the amount of, let's see, can I bring him back? There. Okay, there we are. So in order to increase the sort of the amount of software that was available for the platform, they sort of distributed some third-party things. So I'd been scanning some of those. And the reason I mentioned it is Apple 2 and Music Comp were both Paul Ludus things that were in that series. But anyway, I've been sort of scanning through those, and I think I may actually get rid of them at the end once I've finished, digitally archiving them. But anyway. That's been an interesting project, so I will keep doing that.
Very cool, though. You preserving those things.
Well, that was supposed to be the point. That's why I supposed to have all this junk, right? But I sort of had gotten a little caught up in the accumulation and less in the actual preservation part. So, all right. Any other notes? No. Okay. Excellent. Then I guess that is it for this show. You can find the show notes for this and all the RCR shows at rcrpodcast.com. You can discuss the shows in the forums at vcfed.org/forum/forum.php. You can follow RCR on Twitter at RCR Podcast. You can join our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/RCR Podcast. You can send feedback to feedback@rcrpodcast.com. We are a member of the Throwback Network at throwbackreviews.com. And you can write a review on iTunes. That will help people find the show, we think. And until next time,
Retrocompute.
nice. There.
Wow.
Right on time, I put up the banner. Actually, and we had this whole like a little scrolling thing that I was thinking I was going to put up while I said all that, and then no, I didn't. But oh well.
See, Joel in the comments did retrocompute. Everybody should try to time commenting online at the same time we say it. And you'll see how hard it is.
Yeah.
It
Yeah,
really
not only that,
isn't
but there's-
easy.
There actually
takes
is
a
like a 10-second
professional.
delay or something too, so it's extra hard. If you can do it, you are amazing. Okay, great. Thanks everybody for joining us.
Fun
at the
stuff.
1 hour later time.
Yep. Yeah. Thanks for tracking with us.
Way to
on
go,
that.
Earl.
Yeah, keep that cannon alive.
Flamethrower. Totally using that.
Yeah. All right. Bye, YouTube.
Bye, guys.